Welcome, everyone, to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Thank you so much for joining us on what will be, I'm sure, a very interesting show. I am, like so many of you, love music and have always loved music and have always wanted to know more about it and the musicians that make the music. I can remember in college walking to a music studio in New Orleans where I went to school, knocking on the door and saying, "How can I come to work for you? I just want to see what goes on in here." And the man who answered the door was a very kind guy, and he said, "Listen, we just don't have any room, physical room, for somebody who's not in here contributing in some way or another. We're grateful for your interest, but we can't help." But the point is, I've always had this compelling bias, this affection for music, and wondered what it takes to make music, and wondered what it's like to be a musician and how you can make a living. And if you're a long fan of the show, you'll recognize that I've often had musicians on this show, and I treat them reverentially because I can't believe they're willing to talk to me. I think of George Porter Jr. with the Meters as one of the highlights of this show. The fact that that band, which is one of my favorites of all time, and the bassist for that band would give me the time was absolutely wonderful. All right, so this show, it wasn't but maybe a couple of months ago that a guy named Monte Criswell showed up in Mobile again. He returned to his home. He and I were high school colleagues. He was a year ahead of me. And he returned to the high school to put on a performance and videotape the performance. And Monte is significant for the following reason. He's had 200 of his songs cut, I think is what the industry calls it. He has written songs, and 200 of them have been cut. Let me list some of the artists that have sung his songs: Mindy McCready, Rhett Adkins, Ricky Van Shelton, Sammy Kershaw. Let's see, it keeps going here. Tracy Adkins, Gene Watson, Gretchen Wilson. These are artists whose names that I know, and I'm not very familiar with this genre. Darius Rucker, George Strait, have all cut songs. Kenny Chesney, I'm looking through the list now. Morgan Wallen, of Monte Criswell's. And again, he and I knew each other in high school a little bit, and he came back to town and showed off a little bit, and we were all in this auditorium amazed that our friend, our colleague from long ago, had done so well. And suddenly I realized that this opportunity to answer so many of my questions was right in front of me. So I grabbed his card. He was swarmed with people after his performance. I grabbed his card, reached back out to him and said, "Hey man, would you be willing to come on my What's Working radio show? You're big time. You've won BMI and CMA awards. You've been at the Grammys as your songs have been nominated. But I would love it if you would sit down with little old me and let me ask you some questions about the music business." Now, one of the things that we're going to come out of the gate with when Monte gets on the other side of a Zoom call here after this break is, where does this inspiration come from? 200 songs is a lot. And I write commentaries every week for a public radio station, 3.5 minutes long, 3:15, 3:30. And I have to find inspiration each week for a new commentary. And there is a well that I go to that I'm afraid that I may have plumbed too deeply, if that's the right metaphor. I'm wondering if he has a similar process of being inspired by a song, if he doesn't listen to something that's spoken in his household or on the street that becomes the seeds for a song, if there's not some sort of tune that he hears in his head that perhaps he can't even control, that becomes the background for a song. I do know this, and we'll talk about this on the show. His urge, his desire to become a songwriter was so strong that for a good while he lived out of his car in Nashville after he'd been accepted into law school, but turned it down, chose instead to live out of his car in Nashville to try to pursue this dream. When we come back from break, Monte Criswell will be on the other side of a Zoom call with me. He's the real deal, folks, when it comes to songwriters in Nashville. We'll hear him talk about his experience, the songs that he's written, and right out of the gate, what is the motivation for these things? You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll be right back.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit, with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com, connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. I told you he'd be here, and he is. On the other side of a Zoom call is Monte Criswell. He and I were buddies back in the day. I'm going to give you a little bit of his bio and then enter with the question that I promised in the introduction to the show. Monte graduated cum laude in 1990 from the University of Alabama, turned down a acceptance to law school at Syracuse University, started writing songs. I want to hear about him living in his car, which he told us a little bit about. First, if I get this right, Monte, first, number one, Daddy Whipped the Devil with a Bible Belt. It was a number one gospel hit for Ken Holloway. And then I'm just going to read some of these names again. Tanya Tucker, Gretchen Wilson, George Strait, Darius Rucker, a CMA Single of the Year award, Eric Church, 2 Grammy nominations that I see in this thick bio. Remarkable stuff, Monte. Let's begin the way I begin each of these things. Thank you so much for your time, and welcome to What's Working.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great for you and I just to get to sit down and catch up a little bit.
I know. It's amazing the paths that our colleagues have taken, and every now and then, we see one another and realize, wow, you really done something well in your time. And I'm very impressed with you, Monte, and I'm grateful for your willingness to do this. Let's start with the question I promised the listeners. Where does the inspiration for, if I read this correctly, 200 cut songs, where does the inspiration come from? Do you have a well that you keep returning to?
Well, yes, it's called waking up every day and hopefully doing that again the next day. So you and I talked a little bit beforehand, just life in general, and the song ideas come from everywhere. I do keep an idea file. It's by now hundreds and hundreds of pages long, and I've learned not to delete anything, even if it sounds really stupid or at the time doesn't seem to find a place. They show up at weird times when you need them the most. But just conversation people say, books I read, articles I read. I don't read a lot of like really lengthy books. I did finish a book on Hemingway a couple of years ago. It was 700 something pages long. I think it was Mary Dearborn who wrote it. I think she might have been the first female biographer for him, but it was more of a tome than a book. But I read a lot of short stuff. I love poetry, TV shows, movies, conversations. My kids have been a wealth of information. I've had
Sure.
songs that went on to be hits, just hanging around them, whether it was Just Fishing with Trace Adkins or I Saw God Today or 5 More Minutes came out of my kids always running late, going somewhere and asking for 5 more minutes, especially my 2 daughters, fixing their hair.
Yeah.
So just little things like that. But they really come from everywhere, and they come from least expected scenarios. And sometimes it's just wordplay. We had a hit called Handle on You of Parker McCollum last year, and that was kind of just wordplay in my head that ended up with that particular hook. So they come from everywhere. I think it's important, probably at the top of the list, is to simply be paying attention.
Interesting.
I think there's a song idea in every room, and the songwriters that are successful are the ones that pay attention. It doesn't have to be a line. It doesn't have to be a bumper sticker hook. It can simply be a concept. It can be an emotion. But I do think you have to be on alert and vigilant and paying attention. And the older I get, you also have to write it down. I think that's important to put it in your phone or scribble it somewhere.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: once you have the concept of the song, from what you're telling me, the idea of the song begins before the music begins.
Yes, and I get asked that question a lot. People go, "Well, which one do you do first?" And how does that process work? For me, when I was a younger writer, everything was a title. It was based on a bumper sticker hook, like the old Bellamy Brothers song. If I said you had a beautiful body, would you hold it against me?
Right.
We call those bumper sticker hooks because, they're just kind of, they grab your attention. You see the wordplay and you're like, oh, and you're enamored with the wordplay, and the song kind of becomes ancillary to that wordplay. But for me, as I've gotten older, I write more from concepts and ideas, and where the title doesn't mean as much as the idea as a whole does.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a piano player and a hack guitar player. Some people would argue I'm a hack piano player as well. More of a piano playing lyricist, I guess. But to me, that everything happens at the same time. I don't write music first and lyrics second. I don't, or vice versa. It seems to happen at the same time. When I have an idea or a concept, especially if we get to a title, there's a cadence in the title that kind of lends itself to a certain time signature or phrasing, and then just the mood of it melodically. It's easy to write ballads. Radio craves tempo. It doesn't have to be rockin' tempo. It doesn't have to be 120 beats per minute to be classified as tempo. It can be less as long as the song has energy. Big Green Tractor for Jason Aldean is a good example. That song is not a real slapping tempo song. I didn't write that. A couple of friends of mine did. But it has a sway factor live that creates energy. So you could classify that as a mid-tempo.
So do you have an artist in mind as these ideas are birthed?
A lot of times when we first started doing it, or when I first started doing it, when I got here in the 90s as a working songwriter, we was a different business model. I called it carpet bombing. We wrote songs. Our song pluggers went out and pitched those songs. So song pluggers work for publishers, and they're kind of our point people, our kind of frontline managers, so to speak. They take those songs and they would play them for A&R people or managers or producers or the artists themselves. That still happens, but now it's more of a we're in camps. We've kind of, the artists write on the songs most of the time. So when we're with them, we've kind of either we're getting to know them or we've learned them enough that they've included us in that process again in an album cycle. So to answer your question, in the old days, maybe not so much. We would write the song first and then go, hey, this would be great for this artist or that artist.
Right.
Nowadays, we're more in album cycles. If Parker McCullum is cutting an album and I'm writing with him, which I did in February in Texas, I did a lot of prep work to get to that point, knowing that still he may want to go whatever way he wants to go to make a great project for him, and I go along with that. But I'm compiling those ideas and compiling those parts and pieces and concepts with him in mind. Same thing when I write with Lainey Wilson, same thing when I write with Eric Church, same thing when I write with Scotty McCurry. So we're more dialed in on the artist from the conceptual get-go than it's more of a pre-conceived notion than a post notion.
So we're talking about the genre of country music today. Does the same apply outside of country music? If you were to take on pop, is it the same way, or have you ever tried to write outside of this genre and learn the differences of them?
I think for the most part, it is true in pop. I don't spend a lot of time there. I've had songs that were collaborations, like between Trace Adkins and Pitbull, or Trace Adkins and Snoop Dogg. I've had one that included Michael Ray and Tim Montana, Lee Brice, Kid Rock, and Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top.
Yeah.
So a lot of those were collabs that happened after those songs were written. But we have enough of a relationship and a cross-pollination with Los Angeles that we see a lot of those same kind of templates. A lot of those happened in LA first. And when some of those folks came over to Nashville, we kind of learned how to be part of that camp process of track building and top lining these songs, going in and putting lyric to a track. That's always been alive and well in hip hop. They're even more of an assembly line where one guy will do beats, one guy might do track programming, one guy's going to write lyric or whatever. But the artist is always involved in those processes.
How much of your success comes from being brilliant at what you do versus being a likable guy? It sounds like you're going to spend a lot of time with these guys, and these artists. And they're going to have to say, I don't care how brilliant he is. He's a jerk. I don't want him around. And I think of Chuck Leavell with the Rolling Stones. My suspicion is that he's a nice guy. He's got to be a likable guy for those people to spend time with him. By the way, we got a 1 minute, so this needs to be brilliant within a minute.
I think being likable is extremely important. Otherwise, you probably I would probably have to go find something else to do. I think you also have to be a little bit of psychotherapy kind of guy, good strength. You also have to be a good friend. I think above all that, in all seriousness, you have to be a realist of what you're doing. You have to read the room. You have to help enable the artist find their vision and not let it be your vision.
This is Monte Criswell on the other side of a Zoom call. I'll read this from his bio. Just Fishin' received a Song of the Year nod from the American Country Music Awards and was named one of the NSAI's top 10 songs I wish I'd written. He's the real deal. He's from Mobile, Alabama, and he's on the other side of a Zoom call from me. We'll be right back.
This is Bill Eastet. I perfected my baking recipe behind my live music stage at my little restaurant in Fairhope, Alabama. We have custom-made smokers and small batch bacon made just for you. So if you're looking for the best bacon in America that has been cured, smoked, and even serenaded by songwriters, you definitely need to try Billy's Small Batch Bacon. www.billysbacon.com.
Monte Criswell on the other side of a Zoom call for me from, I think it's his home in Nashville, Tennessee, where he is a celebrated songwriter. And he and I reconnected. We went to high school together. He and I reconnected not too long ago when he made a remarkable presentation back at his alma mater. And we sat through it, and everyone in the room was transfixed with this man. His beliefs, his processes, his disciplines motivated everybody in the room. Monte, one of the things I want to understand about your business is how you get paid. So you've made a song, you've looked at it and you said, this thing is good. I like this song. And so we'll pick one of your artists, those names that many people will recognize. Eric Church, just because he's on this list here. Eric Church says, hey man, I want the song. And you say, thanks. What happens after that? When do you begin to see revenue? And I don't want to get too personal, but I just want to know how this works.
Okay, sure. Usually when an artist wants a song, they put it on hold. We have a hold system here that does not pay anything in Nashville. There are some times I know in Los Angeles and some of the pop aspect that there has been a pay for hold kind of thing. That's never really happened here in Nashville. What hold means is that we as writers and publishers agree not to play the song or pitch the song to anybody else. So
how long does that last?
We usually start checking after about a month or so. We'll check in. Hey, following up on the holds. It's still solid, still strong. I currently have one with Blake Shelton right now that's about 6 months, but it's still on the short list, which means they intend to cut it. So Blake's a big enough artist that we want to abide by that. I have one with Jason Aldean right now. He cuts next week. We'll see if that happens or not. So we abide by that process. We don't make any money until the song is recorded and released commercially. So for writers right now with streaming, and we could literally do an 8-hour show every day for a year on streaming, and how messed up that is for writers and publishers and consent decrees and all that stuff. But we're getting a little better handle on streaming for us. It's not great, but it's a little better than it was. But for writers right now, since we don't have those record sales like we used to, when somebody certifies gold or platinum, a lot of that is streaming. It takes thousands upon thousands of streams to equal one hard copy sold. So it's a little bit, misleading when people see that. Writers. Yeah. In the old days, it was one hard copy sold. It was one unit. We got paid, and that was great. That helped us keep our jobs for our publishers. But to really make money for songwriters, we have to have hits at radio.
So let me step back. I want to make sure I'm following this. Jason Aldean has said, I want to hold on this song. The hold is in place. Jason records it in the future. It goes out there. And at that point, have you negotiated a fee to say, all right, if you record it and it goes out there, I want X many dollars, then a percent of the streams?
Well, there's a mechanical licensing. I'll try to do it in a very elementary way for everybody. It's kind of like it's a federally set rate that we get.
Federally set rate.
It's a mechanical rate. So we have to go in and like NSAI, Nashville Songwriter Association International, NMPA, National Music Publisher Association. They'll go in and make sure those rates don't drop. We have to kind of negotiate those rates a little bit and make sure, we would like to see them increase all the time. But like in the 90s, early 2000s, it was like a little more than 9 cents per copy sold on an album. And that would be split between writers and publishers. So the 9.5 cents would be split. Publisher gets one side, writers get the other. If there's me and you on it, you and I split our section in half again. So, but we still get paid on those mechanical royalties like that. They just don't look the same as they used to because of all the streaming. But when you get to radio, like there's 3 PROs, performing rights organizations, BMI, ASCAP, CSAC in the U.S. And you have to be affiliated with one. I've been BMI since I was 16. And they monitor those royalties. And we kind of know what those rates are, but we also get bonused if they get played above a certain amount of time per quarter. So a lot of complicated math and metrics, but writers have become very good over the years of understanding that and being involved in that process. But we really, in today's time, we have to be having hits at radio in order to try to build some kind of wealth in the business.
So radio.
Yes.
You're talking on a radio show. Radio, and I don't want to be dour, but radio seems to continue to lose listeners. My children, who are the oldest is in their early 20s, they point at that big square thing in the center of their dashboard and say, what is this thing? I say, it's the radio. It's the radio. When I was your age, it was on all the time. So you're targeting radio, which is and there's even talk right now, perhaps you're familiar with this, of manufacturing new cars without an AM option on the radio.
Yes.
So and the radio lobby is saying, no, we need to keep the AM. I mean, it's declining. Yes. How does that impact you? Are you terrified?
As old as I'm 56. I had been fortunate. That if I had to retire now, I could. I would rather keep chasing the dream and see where the roads lead because I still enjoy the process. It terrifies me for what it could potentially mean to all of our formats, but especially country. And it terrifies me for the writers coming behind me. They're in their 20s and 30s that did not have that cushion.
Yeah.
Not only mechanical royalties, but radio being strong so that they could grow and be better writers and give us great songs that end up being classic songs. I mean, these songs are interwoven into the fabric of our lives. And I don't want to lose what doesn't exist yet, that might, from a song standpoint. Radio, tons of discussion in Nashville and has been for 5 years or more, and probably in other formats. And the discussion is, will radio go away? Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting, and I'll say 2 things about it. One, I've always contended that the record labels may go away before radio does, because it's these artists who happen because they go viral on the internet or whatever, that they become powerful and wealthy and learn how to talk to radio and how to promote songs on radio. And they can kind of start performing those functions without a label, because the label was always the funnel point. It's still the quickest way to get something from, whether it's viral or just kind of existing in space, and putting it in front of everybody. It's still very, very, very effective. So I just wonder if maybe the labels go away before radio does. The interesting thing about radio, and I had this discussion with several hit writers last week, radio tends to chase whatever is streaming. Like if something streams well, if there's no label attached to it, but it's viral, they'll go get it and play it. Yeah. And a lot of those in the past have only gotten above, the 30s or 20s on the charts. We now have them getting to number 1. But my question is, if radio chases what's streaming, the people who are doing the most streaming, as you pointed out with your kids, to your point, are not really listening to that square box in the middle of the dash anyway.
They don't know what it is.
And so then, if that's the honest truth, then maybe radio shouldn't chase streaming at all. Maybe they just play what they want to play. Yeah. And if it happens, Does radio then, like for country music, for our format, does it begin to fracture? Do we have 90s country? Do we have pop country? Do we have hip hop country? Do we have Americana, which Americana's kind of having a rise with Zach Bryan and people like that? Do we fracture off? Because that's what happened to rock. We had active rock and modern rock. We ended up with the Foo Fighters kind of as the last man standing, or U2. But it fractured all those charts and it fractured the format. And so I really don't know the answer to all of that, but streaming is certainly in the forefront of discussion. And I am fearful that, I'll tell you this. I had a publisher who I shall remain nameless, a major publisher who's a legend in this business in this town, told me that in the next 4 to 5 years that we would change more in country music in the next 4 to 5 years than we have in the last 10.
It's not the appetite that's changing. In fact, the appetite from me outside looking in is increasing. People love what you're doing. And I was sitting on Fowl River yesterday after having completed a big, long paddle, and it was only country music going up and down that river. Every boat that came by that had a music playing, it was only country music. The appetite is increasing. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. And we've got to assume that the talent will come out at the top. And that's both the talent and the artist as well as the writers. We just don't know how it's going to look yet. Is that safe to say?
Yes, and it's the one time in the history of music that the listener, they have the most say and the most influence. They're not being told what to listen to. They're deciding and they're picking.
Yeah. I'm on with Monte Criswell. We'll be back after this break. You're listening to What's Working.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence, but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit, with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com, connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. We're back. I'm Cam Marston. You're listening to What's Working. On the other side of a Zoom call from me is Monte Criswell. He's been a full-time professional songwriter in Nashville for 25 years. He hasn't scraped by. Monte's done well, and I'm not talking about financially. That's none of my business. But by professional standards, he's done well. In this Zoom call that I can see behind him are a wall full of awards, recognitions, and artists whose names you would recognize that he has written for. Monte, you said in the previous segment, you're 56 years old.
Yes.
You have done well enough that you've said you could retire now if you so chose, but you're not. You continue to push. You continue to chase the dream. I want you to talk to me at first and my listeners second about how you stay charged, how you stay motivated. You're in what so many of my colleagues have described as kind of a tough chapter of life. If I got 10 years before I can think about retirement, I've done well, or I'm an expert at what I've done, but the fire to do it is no longer there. You're the opposite side. Tell me where you get this energy from.
I think it's a couple things. I think I've always wanted to leave on my own terms. There's a point where it won't matter how good the songs are or how great I can write them. There'll be a point when I won't be cool enough to be in the machine of Music Row. Music Row will decide it doesn't need me anymore.
Yeah.
And I've already, tried to mentally prepare for that moment. It's out there. It will happen. Right now, we're getting more songs recorded than we ever have. We've had a better presence of radio than we've ever had. And that's great. But I really want to walk away when I want to walk away and try not to get pushed out of the business. So I think that lights a fire under you. I don't like comfort zones. I always try to get out of a comfort zone. I always tell people your comfort zone will kill you, and it will. It makes you comfortable. It can make you lazy. It can make you accept things you wouldn't have otherwise accepted when you were younger. So I think creating a challenge is always good. And then really, I just love the people that I get to spend time with every day. I have some friends of mine that I've been friends with since I got here. I've got some that, maybe 10 or 15 years we've been friends, but Tom Shapiro, a great songwriter. I work for him. He's pretty much retired now. And he told me when he left, he goes, I miss the locker room the most.
Yeah, I understand that.
And I just don't want to leave the locker room yet. I enjoy the locker room. But, even when I first started writing, it was great. I just love the process of creating. I will admit that the older I get, it becomes a little bit more of a blood sport. Sometimes you just want to win, and I enjoy winning. But I still am fascinated, I guess, at the core with playing something 8 hours later after it didn't exist that morning.
Yeah.
Just not even know what was going to happen for the day. And 8 hours later, sometimes 3 hours, sometimes 6 months later, you're holding this entity that didn't exist that morning. And that's still a fascinating thing to me. It's still magical. And so that's also a piece of what keeps it going. But I do find myself sometimes before I pull out of the drive in the mornings, to pep talk yourself a little bit. But I think if you're riding with great people, you're hanging out with great people, the goal is good. And it's exciting. I think, that's very, very motivating at this point.
There's nothing, please don't let me misstate things, but it doesn't appear that there's certainly nothing physically taxing about what you do. It's not as if you're getting out of a UPS truck 200 times a day like a friend of mine does, and his body simply is going to wear out.
Right.
But it is theoretically possible that you write up until your last day. Is there anything that would prevent you from continuing? So you raise your hand and say, I'm retiring, and that means instead of writing 50 songs a year, I'm going to write 10.
Well, I think that's a very good point. And I think you kind of adjust your schedule. I see writers that retire, quote unquote, that say, well, I'm going to write 2 days a week, or I'm going to write, as opposed to, I have a friend of mine that says we write 5 days a week, whether we feel like it or not. And he's right. And I think that's one way to do it. It's like at the pinnacle, and I'm not far off from this right now because I've just adjusted my schedule a little bit. It's not uncommon for us to write 150 songs a year.
Oh, my Lord.
So we're just clocking these things all the time. And I do think sometimes you don't necessarily run out of ideas or melodies because the ideas are always around you, but you can cannibalize yourself enough that you become tired of yourself. And I think what helps that is to find new people that interject an excitement or a different angle to it than what you normally don't have. But yes, you could write up to the day you leave the face of this earth. And I think it's just more of an adjustment of schedule, of just being mindful of keeping things fresh so that you don't get bored. That's what Tom Shapiro always told me. He says, don't ever get bored with it. He said, if you get bored, you're toast. He said, do not get bored of what you're doing.
So what are you doing to keep things fresh? 56 years old. What's next?
Well, the important thing for me is I get up early. It's funny. It's like I used to stay up late and get up early, and now I go to bed earlier. But I now get up really early for no reason. And so I go knock out 3 to 5 miles every morning. I do walk, run kind of thing that I have, and so I exercise. I get the blood flowing, and we have I got one kid that's in a master's program, one that's in college, and one that's in high school because we're crazy and we spread them out. And we take turns taking my youngest to school in the morning. But I get that exercise in, I get the blood flow. I'm at work it depends if we're doing sessions or writing between 9, 10, or 11 in the morning. We'll do it all day. If we're in the studio, we'll do it at night again. But we just kind of try to stay busy, but also try to stay physically in a good place because you're right. It's not like I'm out putting a rebar in somewhere,
Right.
But you have to take care of yourself physically and all of that. And I think that's important.
So what about professionally? How are you staying challenged professionally? What's next?
I think it's always being willing to try something different, even if it means, I have a great publishing deal. I have moved publishing deals at times when I thought it was important to do that, to get out of the comfort zone. But right now we've kind of taken all of this stuff, all of this experience, everything we've learned, and put it together with a real catastrophic last year that we had. I had stage 3 colon cancer last year, and I was fortunate it had not spread, but we did 8 hours of chemo, 5.5 hour surgery. They took a foot of colon, 34 lymph nodes just to be on the safe side. Everything came back clean and clear. The chemo worked initially, and that was a big help. But I learned a lot about myself, my family, my friends, about life, about how to approach it in a different way. And we've kind of put it together in this one-man show. I'm managed by Stevie Johns and Inkwell MGMT in Orlando. Anybody that's interested in that, you can. I'm on Instagram at Monty MONTY .Criswell CRISWELL, and you'll see the link there for Stevie. And we've been booking shows, corporate and private events. That's kind of where we aim everything at. And for 90 minutes, I'll tell you, this is how I became a writer. These are the stories behind the hits. And this is how we overcame adversity last year at an elite level. We had 17 songs recorded last year. I wrote some of them with a tube sticking out of my chest out of a port. And we had 2 number ones in the process.
Wow.
All that information to everybody and go, man, this is how we did it, and take what you want. Some of this, a lot of the stuff people already know. It just helps, I think, to hear somebody say it out loud sometimes.
So I'm going to put that link to your Instagram page in the show notes for people to listen. But from what I hear, and this is what I saw when you revisited our home here, it's an inspirational story of a guy that pursued his dream to an extraordinary extent, had a CTJ, which means a come to Jesus moment, and you want to share it with people and let them learn from it.
Yeah, and I tell everybody, I have lived a very abnormal life, but still have experienced all the normal highs and lows and ups and downs. I'm just going to let you see it from a different perspective, the perspective of a hit songwriter who is a cancer survivor.
It's an extraordinary story, Monty, and I'm so grateful to have reconnected with you. I'm so not astonished, proud of your success, my friend, proud of your success.
And likewise to you, man. This is an honor for me to be here and just to kind of see everything that you're doing. I think this is an amazing service, to help people. And I think it's great.
You're kind. I appreciate that. I absolutely love it. Monte Criswell, ladies and gentlemen. Go to the show notes at what'sworkingcam.com to find out more about Monte. Follow that link that he just gave it. I'll have it in the show notes. And we'll be back after this break with segment 5, a summary of what we've heard and what you can expect next week. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Be right back.
I'm Joey Mason. For 4 years, my goal has been to produce the best farm-to-table products I'd ever eaten. I've done just that at our on-site USDA facility in Grand Bay, Alabama, allowing us to ship directly to your door. This is true farm-to-table. Visit us at masonhillsfarm.com to see all that we have to offer.
One of the things that this show continues to teach me is I talk to these people in their businesses who are absolute experts at what they do and are very, very successful at what they do, is that they have this confidence in talking about their skill, this confidence in talking about their expertise, that you don't deny that they have this ability. You know that they know what they're talking about. They are I remember seeing some sort of chart on this. They're the known knower. What makes these people likable is the ability to talk confidently about what you do, the ability to convey that you're good at what you do and you've had success at it, and at the same time, humility. And it is a remarkable combination that makes people likable. I'm good. I know I'm good. I know what I'm doing. I'm humble about it. And it can be a very difficult mix for people. One of the things that makes people successful with this combination is not the way they talk about their skill, but it's the way they ask others about their skill. So they can talk about their skill, but then they want to get to know something from you. And you didn't hear that on this show. The show today was designed to get Monte to talk. I wanted to hear about his background and how the business worked, and we did a good job with that. But once the microphone was off and he and I were signing off, Monte had questions for me. He wanted to know what I knew. He wanted to know a little bit about my background and what I had been doing since he and I were buddies in high school, all this kind of stuff that signals humility. It's one of the things that I'm learning very clearly is, as life goes on, the ability and the desire to ask the right questions, to know more and more about the person on the other side from you. Again, this show is designed for me to ask the questions. But when the microphone goes off, when it's no longer recording, it's interesting to see if the other person has any questions for me. And when that happens, it signals a bit of humility, a bit of, maybe it's called self-awareness. I don't know. Anyway, when the microphone turned off, he and I had a wonderful chat. I met a remarkable old friend who's very good at what he does, who is on the tips of the tongues of the major country artists in this nation. They all know who he is, and a very humble, nice guy. You'd like him. I know you would. So I'll have connections, or what am I trying to say, links to his Instagram profile, which he mentioned a moment ago, as well as the webpage that has his bio if you want to look further into him and the many songs that he's written. It's really very impressive. And you can find that, again, at whatsworkingcam.com. Go to whatsworkingcam.com. You'll find that all in the show notes, and I hope you will, as well as links to our social media and all kinds of stuff like that. So that will wrap us up. We got another show coming next week, and off the top of my head, I can't think of what it's going to be about. I know we got it scheduled, but I don't have my calendar right here in front of me. And we'll be announcing some new things professionally for myself, much like Monte's hitting the road with his story. For corporate audiences, I've got some new things planned, and maybe we'll talk about them in the coming weeks. If you've ever wanted to be trained in communication skills, take a look at what we're up to. Anyway, that'll close us out. Have a good week, everybody. As you likely know, this show originates as a radio show broadcast across the state of Alabama, and it continues to grow in both radio listeners and market. After it's formatted for radio, we then turn it into this podcast. Please share it with those you think would find it interesting, and subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube page, where you can leave messages and your thoughts and your comments, and I'll certainly get back in touch. Finally, if you're a fan of the show, please offer a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can find my book called What Works on Amazon.com. In it, I highlight the top 10 ideas from the first 200 episodes of the show. Mind you, they're not the top 10 best episodes, they're the top 10 best ideas. Many times the same ideas are brought up again and again by different guests, and we dig into those ideas in such a way that they'll be easily applicable for your business. Simply go to Amazon and enter my name, and you'll find What Works as well as my other books. Chapter titles include How to Find a Niche, Innovation, Building Teams, and so forth. To learn more about the workshops and seminars I offer, go to cammarston.com. There you can view clips of my work, view workshop titles, view my reviews, case studies, customer lists. It's all there. If you'd like a free copy of one of the chapters of my book, enter your email address at the bottom of the homepage at cammarston.com. And from that site, you can email me directly. I always love to hear from you. You'll also find me on social media. Find Cam Marston on all the social media platforms, and you may need to enter the numeral 1. There's one other Cam Marston out there, and that numeral 1 distinguishes me from him from time to time. So if you're unsure if it's me or not, enter that numeral 1 after my name, and it should do the trick. On a more personal and less professional side, I record weekly commentaries that air across Alabama on Alabama Public Radio twice each day on Fridays, called Keeping It Real. They've won statewide and national awards. They're simple observations on the world as it goes on around me, and they're only a few minutes long. They're a passion. You can find them on the same podcast app you're using to listen to this. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on this podcast or the radio show, reach out. I've worked hard to cultivate a specific listener, and I can tell you all about them, and I have many different options for helping you reach them. Thanks again for listening. We'll have another episode available soon.